I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, madam.
Yes, thank you. So, what I'll start is I'll start off with my presentation. Uh, I'm going to be talking about empathy, and the way I'm going to talk about empathy is we'll first look at how the area developed as such. I hope the PPT is visible to everyone. Em-
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
yes, empathy is one of the areas in psychology actually, and it has uh, a wide impact and in fact far-reaching implications in many fields of research. For example, empathy has is of relevance in education, in leadership and management, and empathy is of a lot of use in everyday day-to-day dealings, what we call as everyday affairs. Not only this, empathy is of use also in times of trauma. And one such example that I can give you is empathy is of use. For example, right now we these are the times of the pandemic, uh, and everybody around the world has been affected by it adversely. These are such uncertain times where people are, do not know whether their job is going to stay with them or not. They do not know whether their family members will be with them or not, because there is a huge rise in the death toll. People are uncertain about how they're going to live. So in such times, empathy becomes of utmost importance. Not only is empathy of importance in research areas like education, psychology, business management, and things like that, but in everyday living and in times of trauma, especially in times where the times that we are going through, empathy becomes of utmost importance. Empathy is an area that actually is covered under emotional intelligence. But to understand emotional intelligence, we need to understand the concept of intelligence and multiple intelligence first. Now, in psychology, we say, since this is broadly an area of psychology, intelligence means something that we commonly call as IQ, intelligence quotient. And intelligence means how well we adapt to our environment. There are multiple definitions of it, but this is the simplest and the most easy to follow. How well we adapt to our environment, how resourceful we are, how quick we are to change, you know. Intelligence can obviously be measured in multiple ways. The standard way of measuring intelligence is through, in earlier days, it was through the Stanford Binet tests, right, by these two psychologists. Later on, we had tests devised by psychiatrists like Kaplan, right? Uh, and the normal average intelligence for all of us, for you all, for me, for anybody, is between 80 to 100. That's normal average decently intelligent. Anybody who has an IQ of, let's say, 110, 120 and more is a genius, right? Anybody who has an intelligence, a quotient of less than 60, well, suffers, cognitively. People, who suffer from Down's syndrome and things like that, or retardation, right? Technical terms, right? They suffer from situations, disorders like this. They will have an IQ of less than 60, right, or less than 70. Now, when we talk about intelligence, when psychologists earlier on talked about intelligence, there were psychologists who talked about the concept of multiple intelligences, which I've mentioned in the slide here. One of the main psychologists to talk about this was Howard Gardner, right? And he talked about how intelligence could be, studied from different perspectives, or how there were multiple intelligences. For example, somebody could have linguistic intelligence, very good at understanding and at using languages. Somebody could have logical mathematical intelligence, good with numbers and reasoning. Someone could have visual intelligence, good with figures, graphics. Somebody could have kinetic intelligence, somebody who's good at body movements, right? Gardner, one important point to mention here is Gardner talked about another type of intelligence called interpersonal intelligence. That is how we deal with, everyday relationships and people and so on. However, Gardner's concept was a very wide concept, right? And so people assumed that in the years to come, people assumed that, as long as people are high in intelligence, they can perform well academically, they are good with mathematics, they're good with language, they will be success stories. Even in our school, if we see our own education system, how do we teach our own students? We teach our students to become bright academically. When we say the student is intelligent, we mean somebody who can analyze well, somebody who is good at the subject, somebody who is good with numbers, good with language, good with what they are doing, they're competent in that, right? Very, very rarely do we talk about intelligence, in which is now becoming popular, and it's becoming an area of research in psychology in the past few decades. Things like social intelligence, emotional intelligence, all these are parts of interpersonal intelligence. What I'm trying to say is this, that even though research on intelligence has developed over the years, and there are psychologists like Gardner who've talked about interpersonal intelligence, but somewhere, both in psychological research and in everyday practice, there was a lacuna, there was a gap. The gap was, we assume that if you're intelligent, you will be bright in studies. The gap was, we did not understand that being bright in studies, having academic intelligence, linguistic intelligence, mathematical intelligence, is not equal to being a success story necessarily. The person can be very successful in their careers, right? But being successful at our career does not just mean good at subject knowledge, competence in the area. It also means competence in dealing with people, dealing with our own selves, most importantly. And that is why a new area was introduced in psychology called emotional intelligence. If I reverse this, I would say the intelligent use of emotions. What do we mean by intelligent use of emotions? How, firstly, we understand our own emotions. Secondly, how can we handle or deal with our emotions? Thirdly, how can we understand and deal with other people's emotions? All these three components, ourselves, dealing with our emotions, other people's emotions, dealing with their emotions, makes up what we call as social harmony. And emotional intelligence nowadays is of so much importance that I will speak about it later. There are studies in management, studies in business organization, where people cite and say that EQ should be given equal importance, okay, not less importance as compared to IQ, right? So, emotional intelligence means handling our own emotions well. Not just us, now for us here in the FDP, it relates to not only ourselves, but whatever profession we are belonging to. Let's say if we are teachers and students, how is it that we deal with our emotions? How is it that we deal with our students' emotions? How is it that we deal with emotions of other people in our work environment? If there are people in the industry, fine, industry personnel, how is it that we work as a team? How is it that we understand and recognize and respond appropriately to other people to get maximum productivity for ourselves and for others? All this comes under emotional intelligence. And a major factor, a major component of emotional intelligence is empathy. Now, empathy as such comes from the German word Empfanglang, which actually means feeling into. In common parlance, I would say it means understanding what the other person is feeling, putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, understanding their emotions, their mental state and things like that. But I would explain the related terms that are related to empathy. but are actually not empathy. There is sympathy, compassion, pity, and contagion, right? Sympathy means understanding the other person's state, but it is not empathizing. You understand how a person is feeling. You understand, let's say somebody has lost their job, right? You understand how they're feeling, but you're not empathizing. You cannot get into that person's shoes and think like that person, understand their perspective completely, emote appropriately. That is part of empathy. Sympathy is simply understanding what the other person is feeling. What is pity? Pity is, I will explain this through this non-verbal reaction. When people say, so sad, that is pity. Pity is when you feel sorry for someone. Pity is again not sympathy. Having sympathy for someone is much better than having pity for someone, right? Because sympathy might motivate you to act. Pity might not, right? Another related term is compassion. When we say compassion, we mean that you not only understand what the other person is feeling, but you are the forgiving type. The forgiving type means you understand their perspective, you understand where they come from, you understand why they did what they did, why they spoke to you the way they spoke to you. And at the same time, if you're compassionate, you will be forgiving. You would not hold grudges. So compassion includes a sense of forgiveness, a sense of large-heartedness, apart from understanding the other person's perspective, right? I can explain this through case study, a simple case study. Okay. This is from a young boy in my neighborhood. Right? We are family friends with the boy's family. So that's how I know about it. This young boy was academically quite intelligent and had taken up science in his school. Now, obviously, he's gone to study, in one of the good colleges, and he's gone on to do his engineering. But this is when he was doing his class 11. He was in his class 11th and 12th. He had taken a combination of biology and mathematics along with chemistry and physics. And his biology teacher, like it is with, youngsters nowadays, uh, they tend to use their mobile phones, right? And this young boy, once or twice, he took his mobile phone to the school to show something to his friends, right? Or to play some game with them, right? And even though the school said that mobile phones are not allowed, right? The teacher caught him, and the teacher took away his mobile phone, and the parents were called. And the boy apologized profusely and said, I'm really sorry. I had got this for this reason, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again, right? But the teacher who caught it was the biology teacher. Now, what happened was, since the boy's parents were called and the boy was called, the boy apologized. The principal understood the situation. The parents also said that we will monitor, and our child is not going to get the phone again to school, right? Somehow, the biology teacher was not empathetic. She started using words like that this boy, let's call him X, okay? I'm not going to take names here. This boy is a serial offender. He's got the phone twice. And the boy said, yes, I've got it twice. I have owned up and I have told the principal madam that I've got it twice, but I promise I'm not going to get it again. The biology teacher refused to listen, right? The principal somehow understood the situation and gave the phone back to the boy. The boy henceforth never got the phone to school. But the biology teacher somehow took a dislike to the child. And every day in class, the teacher started giving indirect snide comments on that boy. Every time the boy would raise his hands to answer something, the teacher would ignore. Every time the boy would answer something that was correctly given by him and not by any other students in the class, okay, the teacher would make some kind of a sarcastic comment. What is happening here? Just because the teacher has built some worldview, some opinion about the student, the teacher lacks empathy. The teacher lacks complete empathy, right? And this went on for such a long time that the boy actually became sad and depressed because the boy was good at the subject, biology. And the boy could not understand, why is man being so angry with me all the time? But the teacher just took a dislike to the student. So much so that the boy lost interest in the subject called biology. Even though the boy got good results and we were informed, right, that in his class 12th exam, the boy did well, even in biology. But now if you talk to him and speak to him, he has a slightly sad expression on his face. He could have taken biology, but he's taken to engineering. Why? Because the other teachers were empathetic. The other teachers did not label the child with terms like serial offender. How many students take their mobile phones to school? How many of us as teachers know that this happens? And how many of us would react in such a revengeful, vindictive manner with a child? The teacher showed no sympathy, no compassion, and no pity. Forget empathy at all, right? So what I'm trying to explain through this case study is something as simple as this. In our everyday lives, in whatever profession or career we are in, especially if we are teachers, especially if we are in business management or in working in an organization, we need to be empathetic. Empathetic to people who are working with us, our colleagues, empathetic to people who are above us, our seniors, and even people who are working under us. For example, students who are working with us, right? There are two components of empathy, and that is, next point, there is the affective dimension and there is the cognitive dimension in empathy. The affective dimension is the emotion, understanding and responding to another person's mental state. If somebody is upset, how would you respond? By shouting on the other person? By saying that, I told you so, you should not have done this? That is not empathy. Empathetic response would be listening to the person. An empathetic response would be gently asking what's wrong. It's okay. An empathetic response would be saying it doesn't matter. It's fine. That is the affective dimension. The cognitive dimension is just understanding the other person's perspective. Even though you might feel that the perspective is wrong, you do not agree with it. This is something that most of us are not able to do. We feel it's a very common psychological thing. That is, we like people whom we agree with or who agree to us. We don't like people who don't agree with us. But empathy means gently and happily disagreeing with something and still being acceptable about the person, still treating the person as it is. So empathy actually has two dimensions: listening to the perspective, understanding the perspective, and then giving an appropriate emotional response to the other person's emotion. Empathy is also different from a concept which I've mentioned here, which is contagion. Contagion means, it actually comes from the technically a psychological term called emotional contagion. If you've seen, emotional contagion can be clearly seen in children, young little infants, babies. If one baby cries, the other baby starts crying. If one person, in adults, we see one person starts laughing, the other person starts laughing. Why? Because laughter is contagious. Like sorrow is contagious, laughter is also contagious. Don't we feel sometimes when we go and meet somebody that, they are very warm, they are very, very welcoming, right? We will respond in a similar way to that person. And in comparison, somebody who's very, very uptight, somebody who's very cold, somebody who's grumpy, we would tend to withdraw emotionally. We would keep to ourselves, right? So emotional contagion is not empathy. Empathy is whatever be that person's response, we keep our emotions in balance and we respond in a balanced and sensible way. The next issue, when we talk about empathy, we talk about 2-3 concepts. We talk about the nature versus nurture debate. We talk about the question of gender, and we talk about parenting and attachment styles. So if you look at the first one, the nature versus nurture debate, right? Empathy, yes, is genetic. Research says that empathy is genetic, in that some children, some people are a little more empathetic than others. Okay. In the evolutionary cycle also, we see that animals are empathetic. For example, dolphins are empathetic. Our own primates, chimpanzees, gorillas are empathetic to their own race. Okay. One example I was studying was of bats in South America, right? In the caves in South America and in Mexico, they tend to they have such high levels of empathy that when an old bat is about to die, the young bat gets food and regurgitates that food into the old bat's mouth so that that older bat can live for some more days. So empathy is there in the evolutionary cycle. It's there in the animal kingdom. So obviously it's present in human beings. If the question is it genetic? Yes, it is genetic. But is it solely genetic? No, it is not. Empathy can be learnt. Empathy can be learned. We can learn empathy. We can also teach empathy, though it will take a little time, but to teach and to understand. But empathy is also determined and learned largely through our culture and through our environment. Uh, is empathy gender based? No, it is not. Empathy is not gender based. Why? Because commonly it is understood that women are more empathetic, women are more supportive, women are more caring, more nurturing. This is there, right, in comparison to men. This does not mean that men do not have these traits. There are several men who will be empathetic, caring, nurturing, and very supportive, right? What I'm trying to say is that there is a very famous debate by this linguist called Deborah Tannen, and she talks about how women and men are brought up differently in the same culture. In fact, she says that men and women have different subcultures. What do we mean by men and women have different subcultures? Women are brought up in a particular way to talk, speak, think, and behave. Men, on the contrary, are brought up to talk, speak, think, and behave in a different manner. If we take the example of India itself, we will see that girls are told to be, or women are told to be, when they're growing up, to be a little less assertive, to be more polite, to be more appropriate in their responses, to know what to speak when, right? They will be told to be a little quiet, submissive. Okay. They will be told to engage in service, in care. So naturally, we understand that women will turn out to be caregivers. They will turn out to be, that section of society that is more tuned into this. So naturally, they will have more empathy. Right? But this is not the case always. Right? Tannen says that it is because of our subcultural upbringing. If we change our subcultural upbringing, both the genders can be empathetic. Both the genders can be caring and supportive. And like we say for men are more assertive, more independent. Women too can be assertive and independent if they are brought up in a particular way. Which brings me to the next point. Empathy is largely governed by something that I just mentioned. It's largely governed by our culture and our environment also. And a major part of our culture and our environment is the family that we are brought up in, our values, our belief systems. And most importantly, another concept in psychology, which is attachment styles. Attachment styles basically means, as parents, when the child is born, to what extent are we providing emotional, mental, and physical comfort and security to the child? The extent to which we do this is the extent that determines the child's emotional stability. If the child has been hugged, if the child has been loved, if the child has been supported in and has been taught the difference of right and wrong, if the child has been told that, whatever they do, they can trust their parents. The parents will not shout and scream at them. The parents will be empathetic. The child, chances are, the child will grow up to be an emotionally stable person. Our natural response in parenting is when our children do something, or as teachers, when students do something, we tend to get angry. If not angry, we tend to get a little irritated. Right? We might even knit our eyebrows. We might say one comment or two comment to the child. But an empathetic response would be not saying it. An empathetic response would be holding ourselves back, listening to what that person has to say. Empathy, please understand, here does not mean giving a free rein to the child. That is not what I'm saying. If we are giving love, affection to the child, somebody can understand that we are trying to pamper the child. No. Empathy means giving constructive criticism to the child, constructively leading the child and guiding the child in a particular direction. Once you listen to the child, then you put out your point of view and say that this is what you think. This is what was wrong that the child has done. So empathy happens on an everyday basis with our students, with our children, with people around us. And our attachment patterns, the kind of affection and love we have received in childhood, to some extent determine the kind of people we are. And are we expressive? Are we spontaneous? Are we approachable? All these are components of empathy. Are we somebody whom people are very scared to talk to? Or are we somebody that people would think that, this person can be trusted? We can say, we can open our hearts to this person. That is the marker of empathy. And parenting styles determine empathy. In fact, as parents, if we practice empathy, our children will be empathetic. They will grow up to be empathetic. The next thing that I want to talk about is, what is not empathy? Before we start talking about what is empathy, what are the strategies for it, how can we develop empathy, let's talk about what is not empathy, what is non-empathetic behavior, right? So there are some particular aspects to it, and these are visible, measurable, observable behaviors of people, right? Because we can't get into somebody's mind, we can't get into their psyche, but we can understand whether the person is practicing empathy or not practicing it. So somebody who gets into prolonged arguments with people, somebody who would unnecessarily get into arguments with people on the slightest of issues, okay? Somebody who cannot make their own peace, does not know when to stop, when to argue, when to raise their voice, when to make a point. Somebody who does not know this is not being empathetic, right? Because such a person has not practiced one of the points that I had mentioned earlier, cognitive empathy. They have not heard the other person's perspective. They are not willing to. Even if there is a difference between hearing and listening, they just listen to it and that information is deflected. It's gone somewhere else. So somebody who engages in prolonged arguments, they want to put their point across. My word is what I want to say, right? That kind of a person is not practicing empathy. Somebody who has rigid opinions. You've seen people who have very strong opinions about anything and everything. This is the way I am. And somebody who makes it a point to show to other people that these are my opinions. Such a person is not practicing empathy. Somebody who blames others for their mistakes is not practicing empathy at all. Why? Because such a person is not ready to take responsibility for their actions. It might be, somebody who's performing individually or somebody is performing in a team, right? But in either case, they should be a mature adult behavior. Psychologically means when you goof up, when you make a mistake, you accept your mistake, right? You might not accept it in front of many people. You might accept it in front of one or two people who are important to you. That is okay. but accepting the mistake is important. Blaming others for your mistakes is not empathy, right? Because again, we don't understand where the other person is coming from. Holding grudges is again non-empathetic behavior. Somebody said something to you years ago or months ago, and then you hold on to that, and you do not realize that people's situations, their circumstances, their thinking, their feelings also change. So that person might be behaving in a slightly different way, or this situation might be a little different for this person. But if we don't understand and we hold grudges against that person because that person said something to us earlier, that is not practicing empathy. Again, somebody who's not a team worker, and this is a very interesting debate on this, right? Some psychologists say that, to be empathetic, you need to be a team worker. But here I would pause and I would actually get into the discussion on introversion and extroversion to understand empathy, because it's a little interesting. Introverts, by and large, mean people who are keep to themselves. They have fewer friends, are quiet, shy. Extroverts, on the other hand, are people who are gregarious, are very friendly, and can adjust to different people, different environments, and to strangers very quickly, and are at ease with them, right? Uh, just because somebody, and this is the debate, just because somebody is an extrovert does not mean that they are empathetic. And just because somebody is an introvert does not mean that they are not empathetic. Why? Because we have research to prove, right? Research from Princeton University, from Harvard University, to prove that introversion is a fundamental aspect of our psychological well-being. If we cannot be comfortable with our own emotions, with ourselves, with our own alone time, not lonely time, alone time, right? If we have this constant desire to exteriorize, to be an extrovert all the time, we are not in tune with our emotions. We are not recognizing them. We are using extroversion as a crutch all the time, right? So the point remains, in I can give another parallel to this. Just because somebody is an extrovert does not mean that they will always be empathetic and listening to everybody. Why? Because if you're an extrovert, the other angle can be, you can also be, the other aspect to this can be, you can also be manipulative. You can also know, you can also be diplomatic. You can know who to say, what to say to whom, to get something out of that person, to fulfill your ends. So there are many facets to this point. Somebody can be an introvert but can be a team worker. Somebody can be an extrovert and keep blaming the other person, appear to be a team worker but actually they're not a team player. So there can be multiple ways of looking at this situation. Okay, the point is, whether somebody is introverted or whether somebody is extroverted, empathy, how do we know that that person is empathetic? As long as they are able to respond correctly to the other person's emotions and they're able to understand their perspective. They might be gregarious, they might not be gregarious. They might be introverts, they might be extroverts, whatever. Right? Empathy, what is also not empathy? Empathy is not mind reading. Why? Because if we've all heard of people like, people who are narcissists and psychopaths, people who are psychopaths are serial offenders, obviously, people who engage in serious violence and crimes, right? As in physical violence, murders, and things like that, right? Narcissists are people who have extreme self-importance, people who feel that everybody in the world owes something to them, and they are the center of attention for everyone. Narcissists have a huge degree of selfishness to them, right? And mind reading is something that psychopaths and narcissists can do. Why? Because they can know how you're feeling, what to say to you, and how to get what they want from you. So the focus, okay, like one of the psychologists, Sarah Conrad, says, okay, is always on a transactional experience, what they're getting out of you, okay? How you are able to benefit them. So just because somebody is able to read your emotions, somebody is able to understand your emotions, doesn't mean that they are being empathetic. Another way of recognizing empathy is, are they selfless? Do they have some reason for doing what they're doing or saying what they're doing? Then that is a transactional experience. That is not empathy. Empathy includes maturity. Empathy includes a sense of compassion. Empathy also includes a sense of selflessness. Somebody listens to you because they're listening to you, because they feel that you would benefit from it, not because they want something out of you or something in return. So empathetic behavior is not a transaction. Empathetic behavior is not give and take, right? This is what is not empathy. So now I would focus on what is empathy per se, or what are the strategies for it. Okay. One of the first things that I would like to tell you when and how, because we have discussed and said that empathy can be learned and empathy can be practiced for ourselves and for others. So one of the first things we need to know about empathy is the relation between empathy and the brain, right? And this is a very interesting area, right? Why? Because we will understand that in our own simple way, let's put it this way, that there are multiple paths to the brain, okay? uh, but there are two parts of the brain that are extremely important in cognition and in emotions, especially in practicing empathy. There is the frontal lobe, this area of the brain, right? And there is the temporal lobe, this area of the brain, right? The frontal lobe is responsible for cognition, for thinking, for reasoning, for making judgments, right? The temporal lobe is responsible for our emotions, for our memory, right? The point is, even though they are separated, like this is one lobe and this is the other lobe, right? And they have different names. But this much we know about neuroscience, even though we are not doctors. For example, I'm not a medical practitioner, right? But whatever little I've read on it and whatever I've spoken to other doctors around me, okay, they tell us very simply that there are thousands and thousands of neurons in the brain, and the neurons, the nerve cells in the frontal and the temporal lobe are intricately connected. That means our cognition and emotion are intricately connected. So one of the experiments in science to prove this is, it was an experiment done by Singer and his associates in 2004, right? And this was an experiment where they had partners, okay, or couples, husband and wife, okay, and both of them, to both, okay, electrodes were attached. They were as part of an experiment, okay, and one of them, let's say the wife or the husband, one of them was given a pain stimulation, and they could see each other, right? The other one was not given the pain stimulation. But Singer et al. Very definitively and even conclusively found that the one who was given the pain stimulation, their expressions changed. They could experience the pain. But it was not just them. Even their partner, their spouse could experience the pain, even though they were not given the pain stimuli. Why? Because they were able to empathize. They were able to understand that here is somebody I love who is experiencing pain, and that must be painful, and so it becomes pain for them, right? So what does this experiment prove? This experiment shows that one person is experiencing pain emotionally and cognitively. The other person is experiencing it emotionally and cognitively, not physically, but emotionally and cognitively. Why? Because they understand the spouse's or the partner's pain, and the nerve cells in the frontal lobe are connected to the nerve cells in the temporal lobe, so they can also experience the emotion of pain. So this goes on to prove Even neuroscience shows us that both the dimensions of empathy, the emotional and the cognitive the dimension, both are related, and both can be experienced by anybody. Another way in which empathy can be one of the ways, let's say, put it, in which empathy can be seen, okay, and obviously learned, is through the concept of mirroring. We see mirroring actually relates to non-verbal communication. If you see two people fighting, okay, or arguing, and both in a very heated argument, and the argument might turn into an altercation, right? They might actually physically fight. You might find people, one of them clenching their fist, gritting their teeth, doing this, knitting their eyebrows, right? Okay. And the other person might raising their finger, pointing at the other person. The other person might do something similar. Mirroring is doing what the other person does subconsciously. Okay. Okay. Now, if people can mirror people's negative actions and emotions, can't they mirror people's positive actions and emotions? So if mirroring can be practiced in anger, cannot mirroring be practiced for empathy? That's the point I'm trying to raise. We can mirror and learn from other people. So how can we practice mirroring, or how can we practice non-verbal communication to be empathetic? Okay. By simple gestures like a smile or a nod. Okay. Or for somebody we know personally, a pat on their back. That is empathy. We need not say things in words. We can show very clearly that we are empathetic and we are there for the other person, and we understand what they're going through. That is also empathy. Another way of practicing empathy, and this again has been proven by neuroscience, is the practice of mindfulness. Okay. In fact, in neurology textbooks written by Adams et al., right, there in their latest editions, they have chapters dedicated to alternative medicine therapy, where allopathy doesn't work, surgery doesn't work. So neurologists recommend that uh, alternative medicine, medical therapy can work. One of the alternative therapies is mindfulness or meditation, right? Now, meditation is quite a buzzword nowadays, uh, and it evokes very strong reactions. There are some people who are very fond of it, and then there are some people who feel that all this is humbug, and we every time I sit down to meditate, I'll get a lot of thoughts in my mind. True, that can be a case, right? So if you cannot meditate, no harm. Meditation is actually very good for developing empathy, because it neuroscience proves that it rewires our brain structure, right? It gives us releases more endorphins, the positive neurotransmitters in our body, elevates our mood, makes us feel happy, and it brings about an increase of more positive emotions like empathy and compassion. Yes, it does. But for somebody who cannot practice meditation, for a prolonged period of time, let's say half an hour or more, okay, a simpler way of doing it is just mindfulness. Mindfulness has two meanings here. Mindful means being aware of our emotion, mindful of what we say, our language, and our emotion. But the second thing in mindfulness is a very simple technique for mindfulness is what is often given in spiritual literature as practice the pause. Before you say something, pause. Just something as simple as this. It's a short way of being empathetic. Before you shout, pause. Before you accuse somebody, pause. Before you want to charge at somebody with an argument, pause. So practicing the pause in your daily life, okay, makes you empathetic, makes you mindful, because we are mindful of our emotions. If you're mindful of our emotions, we would know what emotions we're feeling, what emotions are healthy, and which emotions are not healthy for us. So that is empathy. That is one way of practicing, a very practical way of practicing it. Another aspect of empathy, and the way empathy can be learned, is through pro-social behavior. Active, proactive behavior, proactive, helpful behavior, right? And I have a case to discuss and share with you all on this. This is a case not from India, but this is a case that is a staple in psychology textbooks, right? And it's a case that actually happened on 13th March 1964. And it's a case of this lady, a young American lady called Kitty Genovese, right? She lived in New York and she was coming back to her apartment building. And she was stabbed, okay, more than 30 times by her killer. And she screamed and she shouted for help. And people in her apartment building, because she was very close to her apartment building, people in her apartment building actually heard her screams. They heard her shouts, but nobody came out. And within the next 2 weeks or something, the case became headlines in New York. And it was, over a period of time, it was massively debated, studied, talked about in psychology under the heading of pro-social behavior. The idea was, how is it that these people who were in an apartment building or in the buildings close by, who could hear her scream, why did not they come to help her? This is what we call as bystander effect. Each person felt.
Bystanders happens, ma'am.
Sorry.
Why this bystanders behavior appears in public?
Yes, this is what I'm coming to, sir. Bystander effect is these people, when they were questioned, in the case, when they were questioned by the police, when they were later, different psychologists came and spoke to them, either formally or informally as part of a conversation. They said, we were scared, one, and most importantly, they said, we felt the other person will go to help. So when everybody starts feeling that, the other person will help, the other person will help. So actually, there is a lack of empathy. They're not helping. So from here, we see the roots of pro-social behavior. Bystander effect is just the opposite of pro-social behavior. Bystander effect is non-empathy, not being empathetic. So from there, the theory of pro-social behavior came into psychology, because pro-social behavior said that people should not follow bystander effect. If somebody is in a problem, please help. Whatever way you can help. You don't have to go all out of your way. But in whatever little way you can help, please help. It can be, you never know, it might be a big help to that person. Right? In fact, I remember, I'll state and give you a small personal incident on this, in relation to this case. When I read this in psychology years and years ago as a student, I made it a point that every time I would see somebody in distress on the road, I would make it a point to call the emergency. Okay. Or I would make it a point to ask people to stop and do something about the situation. I would stand there, wait for 15, 20 minutes, do something about that particular situation. Okay. You have to take the person to the hospital, please take the person to the hospital. You have to call their attendants, please inform the attendants and tell them that, your person is here lying as a victim on this place. Please come and take that person. Do something. Okay. So small way. I mean, I am not a medical practitioner. I'm not a doctor. But in a small way, if I can do something, yes, it's a big thing. It's a big thing for the other person. So practicing empathy is correlated with practicing pro-social behavior, being helpful, right? Another practical suggestion that I can give you, this is something that I do very often with my students, okay? And this is, we all know in academics, we have departmental politics, we have university politics, we have all kinds of politics, right? And in some way or the other, all of us are affected by it. But empathy means, even though you're affected by it, you rise above it to help the person. So something that I do with some of my students, I've seen, some students are very genuine. Some students are not so genuine, right? As a teacher over years of experience that these are students who are using you. They are manipulative slightly. But even to those students, how do I practice empathy? What I do is, when they come to me for help, for asking me about books, for asking me about, can you please check this? I will always check and give my suggestions, right? On some topic that they've written. I will always say that these are 5-6 ways in which you can improve this. These are 2-3 books that you can read, right? I know that they will go make the corrections, show it to their teachers and say, we did all this, right? So as a teacher, I'm not going to get the credit for it. I totally understand this. But this is where my basic nature comes into play. If I stop doing that, I will create this dissonance in my mind where I will start feeling that, I am empathetic towards some people and I'm not empathetic towards other people. I don't want that. So I will be empathetic towards everybody in my own little way, right? Empathy does not mean you have to do everything to great lengths. Empathy just means doing it in a small measure every day to people whom you think need it, or people who come to you for help. So there are multiple ways of being helpful to people, and trust me, even the ones who are not the genuine students, okay, even they tend to remember that so and so teacher was a little large hearted and did this for us, okay, even though they might not acknowledge that teacher, even though they might not uh, openly say great things about the teacher, but they do know about it, right? So that's how we can be empathetic. In multiple ways we can be empathetic. We can be empathetic not only to our own family, our own, in COVID, for example, okay, we are all stuck in our homes, okay, we are all working from home, so to say, right? And we might have children staying with us, we might have older people staying with us, okay. Sometimes another example that I can give you for empathy is older people. Several older people are, they get into the habit of being a little repetitive. They tend to say things again and again, right? As younger people, we might feel irritated, but empathy is just listening to them, just understanding that this is what they're saying. Let them say it. It is okay. They want to go down memory lane, they want to talk about certain things. Let them talk about it. It makes them feel happy, right? But that does not mean that you do it all the time. You have a deadline to meet. You listen to them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then politely say, can you please excuse me, I have to finish this work today, right? And then once you finish the work, you come back to them and sit with them. So it's, what I'm trying to say is empathy can be practiced in small doses, in small measures, for our own mental well-being and for the other person's well-being, right? Some more strategies for practicing empathy. One of them is what we call as self-awareness, or what we call as naming emotions, right? Here I would tend to use a very technical term from psychology, which is called defense mechanisms. These are coping strategies. When we are under stress, we cope, all of us cope in our own ways, right? All of us have our own mechanisms for dealing with stress. It might be whatever, it might be physical stress, mental stress, whatever kind of stress, work pressure, it can be anything, okay? One of the first mechanisms, defense mechanisms, is denial. You are feeling something, you're thinking something, but you deny it. Self-awareness is just the opposite. You become aware of your own emotion. You accept the emotion you're feeling. So if you're feeling hurt, accept it yourself. If you're feeling jealous, if you're feeling comparative, accept it. If you're getting very angry at somebody, accept it. Because only acceptance, labeling the emotion, can actually take us towards empathy. And this is not empathy towards the other person. This is self-empathy. This is self-care. Because only when we are a little balanced can we deal with other people in a balanced way, right? So not engaging in denial, right? Being aware of our emotions. This is one of the basic things for practicing self-empathy. The second one is something that I mentioned earlier, patiently hearing the other person. Okay, this is something which is popularized by, again, a psychologist in the 60s and the 70s called Carl Rogers. He talks about a concept called emotional hearing. Okay, and emotional hearing means when you listen to somebody, you listen to their pain. You understand that, okay, whatever they're saying, you might not agree with it, but yes, this is their point of view. Okay. Another strategy is the motivation to empathize. Motivation to empathize comes from, I've used another term from psychology called the Ulysses Pact. Okay, you should be motivated. How do we motivate ourselves to empathize, to practice our own well-being? so that we can also respond sensibly to other people's emotions. This is something which is called a Ulysses Pact. Ulysses Pact means we commit ourselves, we make a pact with ourselves so that we've committed ourselves to a particular kind of behavior in future. So let's say a simple Ulysses Pact would be, you say, I am going to exercise every day, or I am not going to do this one X type of behavior. Okay. So how is this related to empathy? You make a Ulysses Pact that every day I am going to listen to somebody for 10 to 15 minutes. Give a patient emotional hearing to somebody. That's a Ulysses Pact. Now it determines and stick to the pact. It determines your behavior in a particular way. Why? Because if you're not in the habit of listening, it is taking you away from that negative habit. It is taking you in a more positive direction. Whatever you listen to, okay, whatever that person is saying, it might be a family member, it might be a co-worker, it might be somebody in your social circle, anybody, right? It might be from your work, a professional space, a student or a co-worker, anybody, right? But you listen to them for 10 to 15 minutes. You set a target that, yes, I will be free. Even if I'm doing something and I can pause, I will pause. I have the leeway, I can pause, I will pause for 15, 20 minutes, listen to this person. That's a Ulysses Pact. That is motivating yourself to be empathetic. And it's a kind of a positive confirmation. You keep doing it, you'll keep confirming that behavior for yourself. Gradually, it will become a part of you. Okay. Another strategy for empathizing is something which is discussed by Peter Bregman, right, in one of his articles for the Harvard Business Review, and he talks about this, and this is especially relevant for us in times of COVID, right? The curiosity to be empathetic. He basically says that in times like these where everything is uncertain, okay, instead of knowing the answer to everything, instead of knowing what to say, instead of always being politically correct, this is what I should say in this situation, this is what is expected out of me, instead of doing all this, have the humility to say, no, I don't know. Have the humility to ask questions. Are you okay? Are you fine? How is it going with you? Right? Have the humility to have curiosity, because when you have curiosity, you will get the answers, you will be able to understand the other person's perspective, and in that way you will be empathetic. Okay. So Bregman is of the view that we should be humble enough to know that we don't know everything, and that we don't have to give politically correct responses all the time. Sometimes we should have the strength to say that we don't know and we would like to know this, and through knowing this we would know how other people stay, how other people live, and we can empathize with them. Another strategy is something which is commonly known as your intuition or your gut feeling, right? This is the term used here is situation sensing. Situation sensing means you walk into a room and you should be able to figure out, sense, okay, fine, not with too much talking, what the mood or the atmosphere of the place is, right? That is an intuitive feeling, right? And obviously intuition doesn't have too much theoretical research to back it. True, it doesn't have, it has some, but it has less, relatively less. Why? Because when you say I am feeling this, okay, right? It is not, a lot of people might turn around and say, so what if you're feeling it, right? It might turn out to be right later, but a lot of people can dismiss it. So this is just for your own understanding. This is not for discussing it with other people. That you should intuitively know that this is the way this place is, so this is how I should respond. Will being quiet, should I be quiet in this? Will that be appropriate? Should I say something? Will that be appropriate? Right? Should I listen to what the other person is saying? Will that be appropriate? That all comes with an intuitive guessing of what's there in the environment in a particular situation. Also, two more points I've listed here are often, when we talk about empathy, we say we should practice empathy, and we should practice empathy towards ourselves and towards other people. Truly so. And empathy can be taught, because these are some of the strategies which I've been discussing with you all. But a very important point is to remember that we have to be realistic. We have to set realistic goals. And learning empathy is a lifelong process. It's an everyday process, and it takes a little bit of effort every day, right? Just like there is a particular show that I was watching the other day on Netflix, and one of the characters in the show said, about another character, that forgiveness takes time. Forgiving ourselves is not an easy process. Similarly, empathy, learning to be empathetic, is a everyday process. It takes a little bit of time every day. So we have to be realistic about it. Realistic with ourselves and with others. We can't expect overnight miracles. One very practical way of being empathetic is, and something which a lot of people don't like, is being open to frank feedback. If you ask somebody whom you're close to, if you ask somebody, how am I like? And the other person actually says something to you and you don't like it. Okay. Being empathetic would mean being open to it, liking what the other person is saying. Even if they're saying something wrong about you, be open to that idea. Think, am I actually that? Ask some other people. If 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people are saying the same thing about you, well, there might be something. It might not be there completely, but it might be there. So seeking a frank feedback is very important. Okay. We can seek feedback from, mostly people say we can seek feedback from people who are close to us. But it can be our family members, but we can also seek feedback from, some of our closest friends, right? Or if we are close to somebody at our workplace, maybe that, right? Okay. Then there are some more strategies of understanding empathy. One of the strategies is something which is known as emotional literacy. Okay, and this is something that I often struggle with in my classes, or what, another name for this is becoming aware of your emotions, let's put it this way, or talking about them. Okay, what we would call in literature, in academic literature, as conscientization. Conscientization is actually not a term related to emotional literacy. It's a term that was coined by Paulo Freire in relation to education. Okay, but the reason why I'm using this here is practicing emotional literacy in your workplace, with your students. Okay, teaching emotional literacy, talking about it, is all part of conscientization. It's all part of the education process. Okay, and one of the ways in which I do it, though there are 3 ways mentioned here. One of the ways in which I often do this is through an authentic or meaningful talk. So what I normally do is, if I have a 1-hour class, 5 minutes of that class or 10 minutes of that class, I am going to reserve for conversation with students. Just conversation, any kind of meaningful conversation with students. They choose the topic, we all talk about it. 50 minutes of the class is teaching. 5-10 minutes, yes, I agree, might go in your attendance taking, right? So some teachers might turn around and say, we wasted so much time, we can't teach. So there is another way of doing it. The second way of doing this is, if you have 3 classes in a week, 2 classes in a week, you teach 80% of the time. A particular class, reserve 10 minutes, 15 minutes for just talk. Don't do it on a daily basis. Do it once in a fortnight. Okay, you decide when you want to do it, but reserve this talk for conversation with your students. Why? Because they also are, this is, after all, this is more so relevant during the pandemic. But even if there was no pandemic, in either of the situations, okay, it is relevant. Why? Because emotional literacy needs to be given to students, needs to be given to people who are with us, working with us, right? They need to be told that these are their emotions, this is what they're feeling, this is how they can react to it, right? We can suggest them resources, we can suggest them videos to watch, and things like that. So having a meaningful conversation. A second thing which some of my students do is, once in 3 weeks or something, we tend to do this. We have a 15 minutes discussion on some philosophical topic, some small little topic we will have, where everybody will air their views, and even I will air my views about it. Okay. And it can be anything. Maybe let's say something as simple as, what is truth? Okay. These are very abstract topics. That is why I use the word philosophical discussion. But through this, we can always, as teachers, we can always veer the conversation to something which is more genuine, something which we want to tell our students. Okay. And again, I'm repeating, we need not do this in every class. We can do it once in a fortnight. You can do it once in a month. It's perfectly fine. But we should do it. Why? Because it's part of emotional literacy. Something which psychologists very often do, psychology teachers, when they are in the West, okay, they tend to use emotion surveys or questionnaires with their students. So they might give them a questionnaire where there are these questions that if I have a deadline to meet, I will, and my mother asks me to do something, I might not help them. They will give you questions or statements that are situation based, and they will ask them to respond to it, in surveys and questionnaires. And then they would discuss the person's the ideal emotional well-being, and how everybody is responding to it, or how they're falling short of it, and things like that. So that's another way of doing it. But even if we can't do this, we can surely talk. Talking comes naturally to all of us. Another way of building our empathy, okay, is understanding the person's cultural values, where the other person is coming from. Right? This is something which is part of intercultural communication, but the terms that I've used here are actually from Japanese society. And these terms are again from a paper from the Harvard Business Review. Okay, because it's discussed not only as part of education, but it's discussed as part of leadership and organization, leadership and development, L&D. And there, the writer says that, in Japan, the culture is based on social harmony. Okay, which can be explained from the term WAH, WAH. Everybody talks in such a way that nobody gets humiliated, nobody feels hurt. Okay, so there is strict levels of politeness, social etiquette, and social hierarchy that are practiced in Japanese society, right? But this is good. But the writer also says sometimes what happens is that many issues that need to be spoken, many issues that people might be feeling, where they want an empathetic response, okay, are brushed under the carpet. So there is a need to balance this social harmony with Gemba, which is social conflict. Saying something which is slightly conflictual. Saying something which hits the nail on the head. Saying something which is which might not be appropriate for that situation, but will ultimately help that person. So trying to balance social harmony with social conflict. Trying to I will rephrase this and say it, trying to balance political correctness with truth. And we need to do this on a day-to-day basis in whatever situation we are in. Because sometimes political correctness makes us empathetic, but sometimes if we say the truth, it makes us empathetic. We need to decide in what situation, what response are we giving. The last strategy that I'd like to discuss with all of you is strategies related to language. Since I'm a linguist, okay, I pay special attention to the use of words in being empathetic, right? So one of the ways in which we can be empathetic is by showing interest in the other person. How are you? What are you doing? What are you feeling? What do you think about this? Questions like these. What interests you? What are your hobbies? Anything which shows to the other person that you are interested in them, that you're willing to listen. You are willing to be an emotional hearer, intensifying that kind of interest. Okay. The other linguistic strategy is using less assertions. Many times we tend to assert ourselves and say very clearly that this is it. This is what it is and this is how it is. So using less of assertions, using less of commands linguistically, okay? Using more of phrases like, let's talk about this. What do you think about this? Using more of questions. Can you tell me about this? Words like these. Would you mind? If you don't mind, can we talk about this? Phrases like these. So less of assertions, less of commands, more of these phrases, okay? Anything that tones down the force of your utterance, tones down your language use. The third one is the creation of us and them groups. Us and them groups can be created linguistically. In fact, there's a lot of linguistic research on this. One of the areas that I work in, one of my primary areas, okay, gender and discourse, okay, where I also look at psychology, is the creation of us and them groups. We create groups through language, through our body language, through our verbal language, right? Where we can dissociate with other people, where we say that, we don't want to talk to these people, or we snub the other person, okay? So being empathetic would mean not creating these groups consciously and even subconsciously. How many of us tend to do this? A typical linguistic example would be creating an us and them group on the basis of language, on the basis of what people use and the way people talk. How many of us do that? This is a question. This is just a question, right? For all of us to think about. Right?
Madam?
Yes.
Madam, 1 minute. Can we take 5 minutes to close it?
Yes, surely. I'm just finishing this point. One last point, and that's it. Yeah, that's it. So just this small little point that I'm wrapping this up, that if somebody is not speaking in your language, if somebody is not speaking in a language which you think is very proficient and competent, okay, subconsciously, unconsciously, we create a group like, oh, this person talks like this. Empathy would be including that person, right? So that's it. That's all that I had to say. Thank you. Now we can just take questions. Whoever has any questions or suggestions or whatever.
Ma'am, there are a couple of questions on the chat board. So if you can answer.
Please, sure. I have not seen the chat box. 1 second. Yes, sure. Yes, somebody said empathy. I feel what you feel. Am I right? Yes. Not only feeling what the other person is feeling, but understanding their perspective, not judging that person negatively. See, we are all judgmental creatures. We all judge. Human beings are born to judge. But when we say don't judge, we've all heard this phrase, right? Don't judge. What we mean is don't criticize. Don't be negative. Okay.
Madam, I have a question, ma'am.
Yes. As empathy, yes, surely. Should I answer your question, or there are some more here? Which ones should I answer first? Please.
Madam, nowadays we found that a lot of people have the bystander behavior.
Yes.
Other than the behavior. What is the causes of this? What are the nowadays?
Okay. Nowadays, one of the main causes for this is being desensitized. Desensitized, why? Because everybody is. This is purely my understanding of it, right? Everybody is heavily into social media. Everybody is living a very digitalized life. So we are not any longer into our own close connections, emotional connections that we had with people. So we need to go back and rebuild and redevelop those connections with people. Only when we are building those connections, when we are thinking, feeling emotionally, understanding people on a daily basis, can we be empathetic towards others also. So then we can actually decrease the use of bystander effect.
Ma'am, for example, like Nirbhaya Kand, those we learn from the news conversation, the people are saying they are victimized, but no other people are helping them. Why this happened to basically modern town by metro cities? This type of behavior will come up.
Yes, yes, sir. There can be two reasons for this. If somebody is saying that they are victimized and other people are not helping them, there can be two reasons for this. And we need to, before we respond, we need to, again, there has to be a cognitive part to empathy. We need to think, understand, right? So one is the person actually being victimized? Is the person actually being victimized? That's one question. And if they are being victimized, what can we do to help them?
I have give the example of a Nirbhaya case, ma'am. Nirbhaya case, Delhi.
Yes. Nirbhaya case with this was a very, very sad. I mean, it was horrible actually, right? Because that girl, I mean, what happened to her was very brutal, right? And yes, there was bystander effect there. There was, truly, there was. And many people did not respond to it. They should have responded. That's what I feel. They should have responded in whatever way that they can respond. People should have responded.
Now, what is the reason of mindset change of mindset? The reason the people's mindset changing.
Yes, people's mindsets are changing, sir. There is more, like I pointed out, there is more a need for privacy. There is a influx of digitalization in our lives. Instead of our old bonds of emotions and caring and compassion, there is more of all this. Everybody, I'm sure you've seen nowadays in families, everybody has their own phone, their tablets. People don't talk to each other. How many people actually sit and talk to old people in the houses? Older people in the houses, like grandparents. How many people talk? In fact, how many people actually talk to their parents? Or how many parents talk to their children, right? So empathy, when we say bystander effect is something outside the house, right? What I'm trying to say is, we should not have bystander effect, rightly so. But more important is, please start practicing empathy from house. Charity begins at home. We start practicing it from our house, things will become better. From our own. Yes.
Madam, can you just go through the given questions in the chat box?
Yes, I am. Yes. So there was one question. There was one as empathy is, Lakshmikant Gadam asked, as empathy is psychological outcome, does the brain involved to respond empathetically? Yes, totally so. Like I explained, the frontal and the temporal lobes are connected. And the neurons in both parts of the brain are connected. So the brain will respond empathetically. And one of the ways, like which I mentioned, for building empathy is being mindful. Practicing the pause. The brain responds. And the brain responds really well.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, many people are not empathetic, let us suppose.
Yes.
Do we say that we need to provide awareness and training,
Yes,
etc., to make them?
Yes, please. Right.
It has to be done, like awareness programs and training programs.
Yes, sure. Yes, sir. Yes.
Ma'am, one more question I have. Yeah, I have a question, ma'am. Like somebody who is high in empathy, can we say that he or she is strong in her EQ, emotional quotient?
Yes, very, very strong in their EQ. Yes.
And how do we measure this empathy?
You can only measure it through their behavior.
Are there any statistical tools to do some survey or something?
No, you cannot have statistical tools, but I can tell you this, that like I mentioned in the presentation, you can't get into the person's psyche, right? You can't get into their mind. But what you can see is empathy. If somebody is empathetic emotionally and mentally, it's visible in their behavior. So you can measure the behavior. You can give them questionnaires. You can take an interview of that person. Chances are they will respond empathetically. That's one way of looking at it. One more question I have here, okay, in the chat box. Introverts may not be empathetic. Is that true? Some introverts may be empathetic. Some introverts may not be empathetic. That's why I said some extroverts might be empathetic. Some extroverts might not be. What I was trying to say was, we cannot say that extroversion, just because somebody is outgoing, they are empathetic. We can't say that. And we can't say just because somebody is shy, they are not empathetic. That said, any combination is possible, right?
Ma'am, is there any study that people who are empathetic, they have good IQ? Any study, any research?
No, empathy, sir, is a very new area. Like I mentioned, emotional intelligence, EQ itself is a very new area in psychology. Suddenly, psychologists are waking up to the idea that emotions need to be studied from the point of view of intelligence. So empathy is newer than that. If there is any such area, or if I do come across any studies for that, I will pass them on to Professor Panda, and you can take it from surely from there, sir.
Okay, thank
Right?
you.
There
And
are.
can we have your contact details so that
Yes,
we
sure. I can write them down in the chat box.
Madam, I
I'll
have a
write.
question.
Yes,
Madam, I have
I
a
will
question.
share my email with all of you.
Ma'am, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, sure. I've just shared my email. Yes, please do.
Ma'am, in one of the slides, you said like in our profession, there are times that students come to us sharing their personal problems, sharing
Yes.
their non-technical issues, I mean.
Yes,
to say.
yes.
So my experience is when students come to me with such a thing, I don't know why is it so. I'm the only one in the department where the students feel I'm approachable and I'll be giving them a listening ear. But what I feel is, as a person, it lingers on my mind at the background. So whatever is being said to me, it whatever bad or whatever sad things they share with me, it lingers somewhere at the background of mind, and it literally sucks my positivity a bit.
Okay, so that means, okay, what can you do? That's okay. Practice a little bit of, I know it sounds, I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a grandmother here, but this is a small suggestion because this is something I do personally. Okay, practice a little bit of meditation. You will surely keep your positive energy intact. I can tell you from personal experience. Students also come and speak to me. Some of them have very sad stories. I've spoken to them, tried to get them out of it. I've sometimes referred them to psychologists also. You know, I tell the authorities, please refer this person to a psychologist. They are in a bad state, you know. They can't, it's not just us. We are not equipped. I am a person who is interested in psychology. I've done research on psychology, but I'm not a trained clinical psychologist, right? How do I protect my own emotions? Like you mentioned, I meditate. Because and I pray for the other person. If you can't meditate, do a little bit of mindfulness, but do it because practicing empathy requires a huge amount of strength. If you're empathetic, you're a very stable, emotionally healthy person, right? So, and it requires a lot of energy. It will take a lot of energy from you also. Right?
Ma'am, is it possible? Is it always possible to respond empathetically even when something pains you? Let us suppose you have very good idea about empathy and you have theoretical knowledge and also practical knowledge you have seen. So anything happens. Let us suppose it may pain you. By the time you will be empathetic, there are situations, there are circumstances where you have responded in a different way instead of empathetic.
Yes, surely, sir. I will be honest here. I am not going to
lie. That is the thing I'm asking. Is it possible?
Yes, it is possible to respond non-empathetically. As a person, I myself, I'm a very empathetic person, but I have also, I'll be honest, have responded non-empathetically sometimes when it concerns me. Sometimes I get angry, sometimes I get irritated. But the point is this, it's a small little thing that we judge for our own selves when we are practicing empathy. How quickly we remove the anger and irritation and get back to empathy. That's why I said it's an everyday process. It requires everyday practice. You might engage in other emotions. You might get angry, you might feel negative about it, but you have to come back to it quickly. That's
so once, let us suppose you have reacted unempathetically. After that, you got the information. So after that, what will be the reaction? Let us suppose due to some pain you have responded unempathetically.
I always go back to the person and speak.
Oh, okay. So
yeah,
okay.
I do that. Because if it's a student, I always do that. In another class, I will talk to them. Outside the class, I'll talk to them. I'll tell them that this is my problem. This is what happened to me. I'm sorry. Can we have all the time in the world? You can discuss your problem with me. I always
thank you.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
Ma'am, it is in relation with the question which was asked by another professor regarding students coming and discussing their personal problems, that is a non-technical problems to the faculty. In fact, I have encountered multiple number of times those issues, like in the sense, basically I'm a technical, the faculty who handles a technical subject. but somehow or
Yes,
the
yes.
other, you know, they just find solace and they just come and talk to me just like that. And you know, they kind of get feedback from their seniors also, saying that you can contact her and she will be able to help you. But this kind of, you know, triggers a lot of politics inside the department. And you know, like, why is it students are going and approaching that particular faculty?
Yes,
So
yes, it
like
does. It does,
yeah,
madam. I agree
yeah,
with you.
yeah. So like, you know, like, I mean, the talk particularly comes when we are not handling any subject for the particular set of students. And
Yes.
it is like, you know, she doesn't even know, then how can the students go and discuss you know, their personal stuffs with her or
Yes.
whatever is happening? So like, how do I kind of maintain this kind of empathy with my colleagues regarding this issue? Like, you know, I
I'll tell you. It's a tricky thing to do, ma'am. I agree with
yeah.
you. I agree with you. See, what happens normally is, I'll be honest. Okay, I can tell you from personal experience.
Okay.
This has happened a couple of times to me also. And normally,
Okay.
what I did was, I was polite with the colleague, but
Okay.
empathetic to the student.
Oh, okay.
Right? That's my tip. Be polite and nice to the colleague. Right?
Okay.
But
Okay.
be empathetic to the student. You should know who needs you more. The colleague will
Okay.
not need you more. The student,
Yeah.
right? The,
Yeah.
the colleague at the, and this I mean is a politically incorrect, but it's a truthful thing to say. As teachers, we've all seen it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
colleague will do politics about you. The student
Correct.
might also later, but at that moment, the student needs you.
Yeah,
So what
definitely.
I do is, my dharma is, I will speak to the student. I will be polite to the colleague, though I know the colleague will be very well, whatever.
I know.
I'm not using words here. If they cross it with me, that's okay. They can. That's how it is.
Okay.
So most
Yeah.
of my colleagues know me as that. You know, they know me as, oh, she stays to herself. But if anybody needs a little bit of help, I'm there to help. That's
Yeah,
what.
exactly. Thank you so much, madam.
Yes.
Thank you.
There are two questions, sir, that I just wanted to take up from the chat box. There was one which was very interesting. There was one which says, practicing the pause by Soumitra Chakravarti, or delaying the auto reaction. It's the same. We are Dr. Chakravarti, we are all as human beings auto programmed to react. We should respond. We should pause and think what the response is. And many a times, one best way of doing this is, if you don't know what to say, don't speak. Just be silent. Silence is the first step towards practicing empathy. You don't know what to say, be silent. You'll gradually get the response to it. That's how it works. Right? And there was another one, empathy has relation to social values. Yes, it does. Empathy has a lot of relation to social values, right? To our own family values, our own cultural values. It does.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, great afternoon, ma'am, and very wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
We got a practical insights also. Ma'am, my specific questions is related to the linguistic strategies that you have talked during your presentation. So how to intensify the interest of the student? Yeah, and are there any psychological tools and techniques that we can apply?
As are there any, how to intensify the interest of the student? Okay, see here, when we say empathy, we do not mean intensifying the interest of the student in the subject. That we need to be creative as teachers. Okay, we need to be resourceful. We need to change the way we talk to students. Okay, one small tip that I can give you, something which I practice with some of my students. Okay, in fact, at every batch I do this. Okay, and sometimes when I go to my class in face-to-face teaching, I used to do this quite often. Okay, initially for 2-3 minutes, I'll actually discuss something with them. Like, aaj kaun sa, what song did you listen to? Did you watch MTV? Or did you watch this film? This actor was acting so stupidly, or something like that. I will talk like them for 2-3 minutes. So they will start feeling, oh, she's not like some high and mighty teacher. She's just like us. And then after 5 minutes, I'll switch. I said, okay, we've talked enough. We'll come back to studies now. So then I know I've created a light atmosphere in the class, right?
Yeah.
So students are interested then, because we need to show students like very, very clearly that, you know, we've passed through the same things. At our young age, we've also watched films, right? We've also gossiped. We've also talked. Okay, we've also liked songs. So why can't we do that with students now? That's one of the basic things I use, and 99% of the times it works. Even the dullest student in my class gets up. Even if they're sitting at the back and they're like this, okay, they'd be like, oh, she's talking about a film. Okay. And then I'll tell them, I said, now you're sitting straight, now you better sit straight, okay? Because I'll keep asking you questions about the topic concerned, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from anyone?
Just want to add, madam.
Yes, sure, please.
Just as you said, I had practiced one, I suppose last year, that in the first year classes, I used to engage them in the first 10 minutes for a story, and some moral of the story was discussed. So that was very, very much appreciated by the students.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. In fact, there's one particular batch I taught 3 years back, you know, in their farewell party that they had, this huge party, you know, they were all thanking teachers. And you know what they told me? We are thankful to madam, forget the linguistics part. We're just thankful to her for talking. So it became a joke in the university that she just talks, because they were happy that I was just talking to them. They had somebody to talk to. So that's the thing. They will value you. See, the thing is, what I'm trying to say is, now with the digitalization, they will get all the material on the internet. So we are not there as teachers to teach them the material. We are there just as teachers to discuss the material with a human element. So let's be human. We are not robots. So let's be human in the class. Let's be empathetic in the class. If we are that, our students will not remember us for what we taught them. The students will remember us, always remember, for how we made them feel. If we make them feel nice, they will like us. If we don't make them feel nice, they will not like us and they will hate the subject. The example that I gave of this neighborhood boy, he didn't like the subject any longer. So he's taken to engineering.
Thank you so much. Let me, the consciousness enables individuals to monitor what is going on, to be aware of the nature and the quality of events as they occur, and to perceive their meaning. It is rightly told by Steven. Okay, what exactly you have done is that now you managed to talk to me about like a Krishna to Arjuna, okay, and trying to pull down that consciousness, and you're talking about no, empathy is more important. And what he told that day, I was listening to that story, and the stanza he speaks that, you know, I did everything for you, just be there, I'm there. And that's what the great thing that you're talking about. You have created a consciousness that empathy is very much with us, and empathy makes us human. And you have taken the feminist concept of that the mothers are the best empathetic individuals of the world. So do God. And thank you as a teachers, as gods. And thank you so much that you project that those teachers should be empathetic. And it was a wonderful session, madam. And I'll catch you up on day after tomorrow, because we will have another session that is going to be another interesting and intriguing session, because you mastered that. And thankful, and I hope that all of us are satisfied. And I have seen most of the comments are double quote, madam. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we close this session?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, could you supply the materials for exams? The session over, those sessions are over.
Yes, I have sent. I put across not less than 2 PT. What is that? PPTs, and I am going for all PPTs. I will ask Somya madam, and I'll ask all the people for PPTs, and I will give them their email IDs if some people are interested in calling them.
I've posted my email ID, sir. And my
okay, that will do. That will do. And then before going for a test, we will be giving you sufficient material, and after that we'll go for a test. Okay, is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.